Have you thought about taking your dog or your cat for a hike, regardless of size? Big dogs, big cats, small cats. We're going to talk about all of the things that you should be thinking about to prepare and to get you into that trail safely. Because we know hiking is the kind of adventure that's not only great bonding experience, but it's great to get outside, great to get your body moving, great for the fresh air. It's all super important.
And though we both love to hike and have hiked multiple times with our dogs, we wanted to reach out to two pet influencers who are experts in adventuring outdoors and just hiking with their pets. So our first expert is Jessica Williams from You Did What With Your Wiener, and you guessed it, she has two dachshunds that she hikes with. And then our second expert is Emily Hall from Kitty Cat Go, and she hikes with three of her seven cats. And we're going to let them tell you about how they got started and why they love hiking with their pets.
I've been traveling with my cats for about 5 or 6 years. We got started because one of our cats, who has cerebellar hypoplasia, we started taking her out in the backyard. Because of her disability, she can't run away or jump a fence or anything like that. So she loved it so much that we started branching out and taking her more places. And then as we added more feline members to our family, we started training them to do the same to go with Sophie.
Back in about 2013, I was going to college and we had field camps. People brought their dogs. I got puppy fever, I guess. I had looked for a large dog. When I graduated, I inherited a dachshund, and I'd wanted a dog to be my adventure companion. So I had a dachshund, and I didn't know that people didn't really hike with them, so off we went. And then about 8 years later, I adopted a second dachshund, and it turns out that it wasn't a fluke, that he loved it. So then I started a blog, You Did What With Your Wiener, because people were surprised whenever I tell them what I did with my dachshund. Small dogs need exercise. They deserve to have the same experience as bigger dogs, and really open people's minds to that possibility.
So if you are not following both Jessica and Emily right now, definitely go and do that because they will continue to share all of their tips, their tricks, where to go, how to continue to hike better. So whether it's a cat or a dog, give them a follow. And to get us started here, we wanted to start with that idea of training, right? So if you're picking up your pet and you're putting them on a trail, what do you need to do? What do you need to know? Maybe you've got questions about where to start or even where to go. Is it different to train a dog than it is to train a cat?
Or a small dog versus a big dog? And how is training different when you're at home versus when you're out on the trail?
Yes. And, when you're maybe used to walking on sidewalks in your neighborhood, it's a little bit different. So these are all great questions. And we really wanted to know what the training tips were for both cats and dogs of all sizes. And so we went back to Jessica and Emily and we just asked them, what is your process? How can we help people, educate them and inform them? And where do they start?
The first step is to harness and leash train them. You want to find a harness that fits them well, secure, and that they can't slip out of. You start introducing the harness to them at home. Before you even put it on them, you just leave it out on the floor so they can sniff it. If your cat goes and sniffs the harness and seems interested in it, you give them a treat. Once you think that they're ready to try it on, you put it on them, but for just small increments of time, maybe just a couple of minutes. Again, rewarding with treats the whole time. The goal is for them to always associate the harness with positive experiences. Treats all the time.
I mean, you're real excited, so you want to take to the trails right away, but you actually shouldn't. The training starts at home and it starts simple. Your dog has to have leash manners. You need to know basic commands. So when you're thinking of leash manners, do keep this in mind. When they're walking beside you on a sidewalk, a lot of people want a heel and they're right next to you. But when you're on a trail, that's actually not real safe because some trails are narrow. So you do want to keep in mind that sometimes you're probably going to want your dog out in front of you or behind you. You can work on things around the neighborhood like balance, teaching them up on something, whether you want to get them out of the way of someone hiking on the trail, or you just want to take a break and not be blocking the trail. Those are kind of training things you can start at home and then take them to the trail later.
Those are some great tips and are definitely some things you should consider the next time you're getting ready to go hiking with your pets. But there is more than just training when it comes to preparing to go hiking with your cat or your dog or whoever else you want to bring with you. One of my biggest tips is to start small. When I'm getting ready for a longer hike, I want to go on smaller ones first to make sure that both myself and my dogs are up for that 12-mile hike that we're aiming for.
Another aspect to that is I would say make sure that you, when you're around in your neighborhood, that you're using the gear that you're going to use when you go big. So starting small doesn't mean treating it as small, but use the same harness, use the same leash or a pack or whatever pieces of gear are going to be on your dog or cat. Have them use them on the smaller pieces too, because you don't want to end up realizing something doesn't work. Or my mistake was putting some gear on my dog and it ended up giving him hot spots, and you don't want that either. You want to know that your pet is going to be able to move, that it's going to be functional, that it's not going to bother, anywhere on them, any kind of hot spot. So that way everybody can hike happily.
Yeah, and I would even say gear training is a type of training. So you want to make sure that your dog, your cat is comfortable with what they're going to be wearing the day of ahead of time, just like Chloe mentioned. And one more thing is that I would recommend doing some research on where you're going. Not only do you want to know what to expect in terms of the terrain, the obstacles, but you also want to know how busy it is. You want to know, should you avoid that Saturday afternoon time slot just because everyone else is going to be there? Maybe it's better for you to go Saturday morning or on a weekday instead. And I think that's especially true if you're new to this. If it's the first time you've taken your dog or your cat out, you want to make sure that there's less possible chances for things to go wrong.
Yes, and one other way to do that is to take note of whatever guidelines or rules are in place. And I know we're both in Colorado, so there's a lot of hiking up in the mountains, and some places you have to have your dog on leash, and other places have off-leash guidelines, which are still guidelines. So make sure you know what the rules are for where you're going, because off-leash still means under voice control, and on-leash means you should really have your dog on leash. And I know some of us seek that out for our dogs who are better on leash when they're hiking. So know those facts. Where are you going? Like Jessica said, is it busy? What are the rules? What are the guidelines? What kind of wildlife might you see? Because that's something else to think about and potentially prepare for. It's one thing to see rabbits. It's another thing to see a bear. So you just never know. And I think that's part of the research. It's always good to have the full gamut of everything you're in for.
And even with all the research that you will do, you might not be prepared for everything that you come across. And that's why we went back to both Jessica and Emily to ask for their top tips for when you're actually on the trail.
My biggest tip for when you take your cat somewhere on an adventure is to always have a backpack carrier, some sort of place that if they get really scared, if they get spooked by a dog or a person or a loud noise, some place that can be their safe space that they can easily retreat to. Make sure that your cat is comfortable with that carrier before your hike. So that way it's a safe space. So if they get scared, you can put it on the ground and they just go inside and then they're fine and comfortable. You can give them some treats. It'll help them calm down. Another tip is that cats tend to not drink much water. To keep them hydrated, make sure that you have some sort of treat that's high in water content. A lot of people use those pureed, squeezy cat treats that are like in a tube. Those are really popular because they have so much water in them. So if your cat is not drinking water, when you're out on a hike, you can give them that treat and it's keeping them hydrated. It's also important to understand that walking a cat is not going to be like walking a dog. So don't go into it with the expectation that it's going to be like walking your dog, because then you'll be frustrated and disappointed. They're different animals. They act differently and respond to everything differently. Just understand that cats tend to meander and wander. Adjust your expectations accordingly, and you and your cat will have a much better time that way.
One tip about water is a lot of people think, oh, my dog will drink when they're thirsty. Well, in fact, most won't. Anytime a dog is under stress, and that can be good stress or bad stress, it's just stress on the body. So exercise is one of those. They will tend to eat and drink less. It's very important for me and my dog to stay hydrated. So I actually do flavor the water to trick them into drinking. So I flavor it with either like no sodium bone broth, or I will put in a little splash, more like 50-50 of coconut water, unsweetened if you can. But in a pinch, I'll drop some treats in there, especially the ones you can crumble up that are powdered. Just know when you go and you're taking your dog, you might not make it to your destination. Again, it's watching your dog and making sure that they can handle it and that they're having a good time. And if it turns out they're not, you'll just need to be okay with turning around. Otherwise, don't take your dog with you. So it's always good to have a plan. What if that does happen? What if you get in a situation where it's kind of, oops, I have small dogs. I can just pick them up and carry them. Some people with medium-sized dogs will practice throwing them over their shoulder just in case they have to carry them out. They actually make slings for larger dogs. They work for smaller dogs too, but they're absolutely necessary for larger dogs. You want to turn around before you need that plan, but you always should have a plan for getting your dog out of a trail if they're unable to walk on their own.
And now that you've gotten all of those tips from both Jessica and Emily, let's talk a little bit about gear. We want to make sure you're most prepared with everything that's going to help you have a successful and safe hiking trip. For me, when I've taken my dogs hiking, not only am I thinking about the harness, but I'm also thinking about the leash, because I really like the leash that attaches around the waist, because it still gives them some room. You know, there's still about 6 feet for them to play with between me and them, but it gives me a little bit more like strength. So if they see something or something spooks them, I'm more stable when they're attached to my waist. So I really like that particular leash when hiking. Plus, then my hands are free. What about you, Jessica?
I love those leashes too. It's very interesting though, because my husband doesn't. He really would rather prefer the traditional leash with a handle. But I think that just comes to show you that you really need to figure out what works best for you and your style of hiking, as well as your pet, whether it's a dog or a cat. And then I also like to think about the stuff that I need for both of us. So for everyone who's going to be out on the trail with me. And I think the number one thing is water. And how I bring water for my pets depends on how I bring water for myself. Sometimes I bring them their own little water bottle that has a bowl attached and I can just pour it into that bowl. But sometimes I actually bring a hydration pack. I bring a ton of water and I need to be able to share that. So I look towards a pop-up bowl that I can easily then, spray some of that water in and then bring that to my pet.
And it's always better to have more water than not enough, because you never know. And one of the other things gear-wise that's really important is a first aid kit. You want to have everything for scrapes and cuts and bee stings, the things that you could potentially run into out on a hike in the wild. And, it's supplies. Think of it as that. What are the supplies you need to get you through, making sure that you and your pets stay safe? That's going to depend a little bit on where you're going. So if you're going to go for a hike around a lake, that's one thing. If you're going to go up a 10,000-foot mountain, that's another. If you're going to go for a 12-mile hike, you got to think about that, because longevity means something. So pack your first aid kit accordingly, and then you can just make sure everybody's safe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a 12-mile hike is going to be much longer than your walk around the lake. But luckily, a lot of first aid works well for both pets and humans. There are exceptions, so you want to double check that you're not putting something on your pet that you shouldn't. But the good news is that you don't have to carry 2 separate first aid kits. You can use the supplies in a single first aid kit for both of you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we talked about leashes and harnesses, and we've talked about water and first aid kit. And you also want to make sure you have got something for your dog or cat to eat. Calories. And that can, again, depend on how far you're going, right? The lake versus a 12-mile hike, those are very different things to prepare for when it comes to food. But you want to make sure you have enough calories for them to keep them sustained, because just like you, they're going to be exerting a lot of energy, and you don't want to end up having to carry them the whole way, which I have seen happen.
Yes, so calculate that. Don't bring too many, but bring just enough. And of course, my dogs would be very upset if we did not mention snacks, which they think is number one. And the other benefit of treats too is that it can help you lure your pet out of a sticky situation. So maybe there is a wild animal and you kind of want to get them away from it. Or maybe there's another pet or animal on the trail that you want them to stay to one side. Treats are a great tool for that as well. But we couldn't finish this section on gear without going back to our experts, Jessica and Emily, to see what their must-have items are.
So in addition to the regular harness and leash and backpack carrier, I always make sure that I have my cat's ID tags and that they're on my cat. My cats are also microchipped. If they were to step out of the harness or leash, that They could be identified treats. I usually bring the regular treats that they love, and then also the pureed squeeze treats and pet waste bags. That's something that a lot of people adventuring with cats don't think about. It's something that's usually associated more with dogs. But if your cat uses the bathroom while you're out on a hike, then you're going to need to pick up after them, just like people with dogs. So be prepared with those pet waste bags. You also want to bring along a favorite toy. My cats really like those wand toys. So if they get nervous or are getting distracted really easily by things and I'm wanting them to move along the trail a little bit faster, I can dangle their favorite toy and encourage them to chase after that and go after that and redirect their attention from whatever it is that's distracting them.
So I try and be over prepared on every hike, but a minimum of gear that I always take with me every single time. I bring a headlamp all the time, even if it's during the day and I'm not going to be out, because you never know when something's going to happen and you get stuck out. But the other thing is if something happens with your dog, it can be hard to really look at the injury because of the shadow. So you can move into the shade, but wear your headlamp. And that way you can get a really good spotlight on what's going on. I bring an extra leash. I not only bring an extra leash in case the one I'm using breaks, but in case I run across a lost dog on the trail. I do usually, even if we're hiking in the summer, I bring a thin dog jacket for them. You don't know. You could get stuck out overnight. I like to know that I could reasonably survive one night in the woods if I had to. And a jacket will really help that to retain body heat. So those are the things that I pretty much don't leave home without.
Those two are full of such great information, and we hope between what they've shared and what we've shared that we've really encouraged you to give hiking a try with your dog, regardless of size, or even with your cat. And if you want to follow our experts, our pet influencer friends, and their adventures when they're out in the wild, be sure to check them out.
And if you go on adventures, we want to hear about it. Tell us your gear, your tips, your tricks, your training, whatever it is that you do with your dog, regardless of size, or your cat, or maybe it's goats or whatever you hike with. We want to know. So tell us in the comments. And of course, if you enjoy these kinds of informational videos about the pets and animals that you love, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that we can show up in your inbox every time we publish a new one.